Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome again to Syriana Analysis. I'm your host, Kevork Almassian. Thank you very much for tuning in to today's live streaming, whether you're watching this stream on YouTube or on Rumble. And I would like to welcome our dear friend Red Access, our live chat moderator who returned after 2 weeks of absence. And I hope and I believe that he is now among us in the live chat. He commented at the beginning and he said, "Hey, Kevork and everyone." And he was surprised that our stream will start at 12 his time. I believe he's somewhere in the eastern shore of Eastern American time, probably. That because we changed the time zone in Germany and we are now officially a winter time. Imagine my happiness about shorter days, more darker days, foggy days, and sunless days in Germany. That would be really fun for the next 3 to 4 months. And we are also happy to see you back, our friend. Everybody was asking about you, and we also missed you and missed your moderating of the live chat. Probably at the current moment, this particular moment, he's not here, but he will definitely come and moderate our live chat during this stream. I would like to thank our friend for becoming a member of Syriana Analysis for 18 months. Thank you so much, really. And also he gifted 5 Syriana Analysis membership. That is very, very generous of you. I'm very grateful, my friend. So what are we going to talk today? I'm going to connect the dots, my friends. And why I'm doing this, because this week Israel hosted a conference in Tel Aviv. I think the conference called a Syrian minority gathering or so. So what Israel is doing now, inviting so-called Syrian influencers from minority communities to Israel and presenting itself as the patronage, as the savior of these minorities in Syria. Now, as I promised myself, I'm not going to go after and criticize the people personally, but I'm going to explain to you what Israel has done since the 80s in the Middle East and why at the current moment Israel is interested in cooperating with influencers from the minority groups, including an attempt has been done with me personally to cooperate with, and I was also invited to Israel by someone who claims to be a private person. And the argument is this, they say the Assad regime is gone. And now we have to cooperate together against these radical Takfiri groups, although Israeli authorities and Israeli officials themselves have propped up these Islamist groups in Syria. But today we're going to do a little bit deep dive into history, into geopolitics, into political context to understand what the hell has happened in the past 20 years in the region. So if you're looking forward to that, please hit the like button as we watch this stream. It really helps me, helps my work, and this content would reach to more people during the live streaming and afterwards. So let's start with part 1 of today's live streaming, and that is the architecture of chaos. I think when we talk about the modern Middle East or West Asia, we are not describing a naturally occurring landscape of conflict. We are looking at the architecture of chaos. And this architecture, in my opinion, has been planned, designed, and sustained in the past few decades. I think the region has rarely enjoyed stability because for more than a century, and even beyond, it has been treated as an experimental field for the geopolitical ambitions of larger powers, right? Let's start with Sykes-Picot, for example. The Sykes-Picot Agreement in the 1910s, I think it was in 1918, which was agreed upon. So from the Sykes-Picot Agreement to today's 21st century's covert operations, the maps in West Asia or the Middle East have been drawn not by the people, not by the indigenous people, not by referendums and asking the opinion of the people who live there, but by those who see the region as simply a chessboard for energy routes, security buffers, and ideological influence. One of the most revealing documents, in my opinion, in this regard, let me show you this document, and if you want, I can also post this document in the live chat for you to also take a look at. So where is it? Where is it? Where is it? This is it. So Sykes-Picot agreement, Microsoft. Yeah, this is it. So this is the plan, right? The Zionist plan for the Middle East. This was the Yinon Plan. And this is translated and edited by Israel Shahak. As you can see, this is the map. Israel of Theodor Herzl in 1904 and of Rabbi Fishman in 1947. And they are also envisioning the Greater Israel Project, right? So this is a strategy for Israel in the 1980s, right? In the 1980s. This was published in 1982. But we will go through this strategy and we will notice how, and we will try to draw parallels and see that this plan also, which was written in 1982 by Israeli strategist Oded Yinon and published by the World Zionist Organization and translated later by Israel Shahak, is still relevant today. Today in 2025, we are living in November 2025. And this paper has been published under the title A Strategy for Israel in the 1980s. So the essays, let me also drop this link in the live chat for you if you like to read it yourself later. So I just posted it in the live chat. Where am I now? Yes, this is me. One of the, in my opinion, in this case, I think this document's core proposition was very simple. You don't really need to be a genius to understand it. They simply say that Israel's long-term security would be best guaranteed not by peaceful coexistence with strong neighbors, but by the fragmentation of those neighbors into a constellation of small sectarian entities too divided to pose a collective threat. So let's repeat. The proposition of this document is that Israel's long-term security would be best guaranteed not by peaceful coexistence with strong neighbors, but by the fragmentation of those neighbors into a constellation of small and sectarian entities that are too divided to pose any collective threat against Israel. So large centralized Arab states, for example, Egypt, Syria, and Iraq, were portrayed in this strategy as temporary artificial creations that could be dissolved along ethnic and religious lines. They mentioned Syria, Iraq, and also Egypt. And they said that these three countries were temporary artificial creations that could be dissolved along ethnic and religious lines. Yinon wrote this document at a moment when Israel was emerging from the trauma of the 1973 war and the 1973 Camp David Accords with Egypt. So he argued that instead of trusting any peace agreement, at that time with Egypt, Israel should use the surrounding region's internal divisions as instruments of policy. He proposed a future in which Lebanon would remain partitioned, because during that time the civil war in Lebanon started, and he said Syria would break in two. Listen to this. He said in the 1982, he said Syria would break into Alawite, Sunni, and Druze regions. He also said that Iraq would divide among Kurds, Sunnis, and Shiites. In the margins, Shahak's commentary, of course, pointed out that this was not a fringe fantasy, but a codification of a recurring current in Israeli strategic thought. And just think ahead now, what happened after this document? 2003, Iraq was invaded and the region was divided into three parts: Kurdish, Sunni, and Shia. So the strategy has been materialized. And Syria, after the regime change, they have almost achieved this strategic goal of the Yinon Plan, basically, in Syria. And I'm going to elaborate on that more. So I would like to welcome our dear friend. I was telling them the story that in the past 2 weeks you were missing, and we missed you, and we missed your moderation of the live chat. Everybody was asking about you. Welcome back, dear friend, with access to our streams. So the Yinon Plan, my friends, became, in my opinion, shorthand for a doctrine of controlled chaos, right? It was a belief that Israel's security could be achieved by ensuring that the Arab world never again unified around a single political or military center. So it was the geopolitical mirror image, right, of the Roman maxim, that is divide and rule. Very easy. The Brits implemented that for a very long time. Now, to understand the depth of this logic, in my opinion, one must see it as part of a longer continuum. For example, let me show you this one. So we have to stop broadcasting that one, and we have to put this one now. Yep. Let me do it like this, it's better. To understand the depth of this logic, I think we must see it as part of longer continuum, right? British and French colonial administrations had already drawn the Levant's borders with similar intent to separate communities and prevent the emergence of a unified Arab polity. Yinon merely updated the imperial grammar for the Cold War era, arguing that demographic and sectarian fault lines could be weaponized by a technologically superior state surrounded by weaker, internally fragmented societies. So let's stop sharing the Yinon Plan and go to part 2, and that is the genesis of the Yinon doctrine. In the early 1980s, my friends, Israel's military doctrine was shifting from conventional wars toward long-term strategic deterrence and regional manipulation. The trauma of the 1973 war had convinced many in the Israeli security establishment that future threats would come less from direct invasion and more from ideological or demographic pressure. So they believed back then that future threats would come less from direct attacks by regional or neighboring countries, and this attack would be represented more in ideological or demographic pressure, like they're surrounded by many Arabic population around them, and also in the occupied territories, the Arabs are multiplying even faster than the Jewish people, so they have this demographic pressure. So Yinon's plan was in tune with this fear. The plan presented the Arab states as inherently unstable mosaic that would eventually implode under their own contradictions if gently pushed and manipulated by outside forces, and this force is Israel. So they took Lebanon as a test field, right? So in Lebanon, they took the ideas of Yinon Plan and they tested it there first. The civil war that began in 1975 in Lebanon offered a laboratory for the politics of fragmentation. Israel's 1978 to 1982 invasions into Lebanon were justified, of course, publicly as security operations against the PLO, but their long-term outcome was the creation of a patchwork of militias and enclaves inside this already small country. Yinon cited Lebanon explicitly in his paper as the model for what could happen to Syria and Iraq next. So Shahak's forward to the English translation of this Yinon Plan observed that the plan's mindset resembled early 20th century European geopolitics, especially the theories that justified German expansion eastward through the dissolution of multinational states. So listen to this carefully, because this is very, very important. This justification in both cases was the same. They came to the same conclusion, and that is, in their eyes, diversity is instability. In the eyes of the Zionists in the 80s, they believed that diversity is instability. Therefore, fragmentation is order. Now, you can project this in Europe about diversity, that diversity is a strength or diversity is not a strength. There is an ongoing debate about it. If you believe that diversity is fragmentation or diversity is instability, then you have to go also one step further and check who was behind the influx of the migrants and the refugees into Europe. I'm saying if you believe that diversity is instability. Now, in the Israeli press of that period, in the 1980s, military correspondents such as Ze'ev, his name is Ze'ev, let me check again. Yeah, his name is Ze'ev Schiff. Ze'ev Schiff, he discussed similar possibilities and noted that from Israel's perspective, he said this in Haaretz in 1982. He said, quote, "The best outcome in Iraq would be its division into three parts: a Shiite south, Sunni center, and Kurdish north." And this thinking was not limited to one Israeli strategist. It had become basically part of the national conversation about how a small state could survive among larger ones in West Asia or in the Middle East. So the plan's influence extended beyond this immediate policy. It framed a worldview in which demographic management, territorial revisionism, and psychological warfare were instruments of national defense. In later decades, American neoconservatives, the neocons, they have rediscovered these ideas and repackaged these ideas under the vocabulary of democratization and nation building, right? But the underlying structure remained the same. Weaken centralized states, empower local identities, which means sectarian and ethnic identities, and ensure strategic fluidity favorable to outside control. And here comes the part 3, and that is from a Zionist strategy to neocon doctrine. The Cold War's end, in my opinion, opened a new chapter for the Zionists and the neocons. When the Soviet Union collapsed, Washington emerged as the single global center of power, right? And with that came a network of so-called think tanks and policymakers influenced by the same logic that had animated Yinon Plan. I think this is important to show you this document. If you want, I can also drop this link, by the way, in the live chat for you to read. This is A Clean Break, a New Strategy for Recurring the Realm. It was published by the Institute for Advanced Strategic and Political Studies in Jerusalem. And I think they had also, of course, their headquarters in Washington. So this paper was published in 1996. It's called A Clean Break, a New Strategy for Securing the Realm, prepared for Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu by a group of American neocons. So this paper was submitted to Netanyahu in 1996 by the neocons, including Richard Pearl, Douglas Faith, and David Wurmser. They explicitly argued for reshaping the Middle East to benefit Israel's strategic depth. And this paper recommended removing Saddam Hussein, rolling back Syrian influence in Lebanon, and fostering conditions for regional realignment. Did I drop this link in the for you? No, I didn't drop this link. Let me drop this link first to you in the live chat if you guys want to read this document. So I dropped it in the live chat for you to see. After this document was presented, the Project for the New American Century, PNAC, carried the same logic into US grand strategy, promoting regime change operations as a moral and strategic necessity. So the invasion, the 2003 invasion of Iraq implemented this vision, right? And with catastrophic results. The dismantling of Iraq's army, the empowerment of sectarian militias, and the near collapse of the Iraqi state. What Yinon had described in theoretical terms in 1982 as an advantageous fragmentation became US foreign policy in practice. So by the late 2000s, the pattern was clear for everyone who wants to see. Whenever a regional state maintained secular nationalism, a strong central army, and an independent foreign policy, it eventually became a target for isolation, destabilization, or regime change. After Iraq, Libya in 2001 followed the same script, right? But Syria, in my opinion, was the keystone. Syria was too important. And yeah, I think Syria's geography, alliances, and ideological independence made it the last bastion or the bastion of the old Arab Republican model or pan-Arabism. Breaking Syria, which happened, would accomplish what decades of confrontation between Syria and Zionists and neocons had failed to achieve. And that goal was the neutralization of the one Arab state still capable of linking the Levant's diverse communities into a coherent whole. This is the unfortunate truth. Let's go to part 4. As you're watching this stream, my friends, I would really appreciate it if you simply hit the like button, thumbs up, to show appreciation to the work I'm putting and the efforts I'm making to bring to you these streams. So we go now to Operation Timber Sycamore. And of course, in 2011, when the protests started in Syria in March, April 2011, many people said those were part of the original wave of the so-called Arab Spring. But what started as demonstrations allegedly for reform quickly turned into a heavily militarized conflict once foreign funding and arms arrived, right? So the CIA's Operation Timber Sycamore, launched in cooperation with Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and Turkey, became one of the largest covert programs in the entire of US history. They spent $1 billion per year. Only the CIA spent $1 billion per year to arm and train multinational takfiris in Syria. So billions of dollars worth of weapons were funneled through Jordan and southern Turkey to groups labeled as moderate rebels. I will show you this video for Professor Jeffrey Sachs. And in 4 minutes, he explains basically everything we need to know about Operation Timber Sycamore. And I believe this is the most comprehensive explanation, which we have to, I think, watch and take some lessons.
This war in Syria did not come from Assad's repression. It did not come from Assad's dictatorship. This war came from a presidential order by Obama to overthrow Assad, starting in the spring of 2011. We have a name for this program. It was Operation Timber Sycamore. The United States, together with other countries in this region, trained fighters, especially jihadists, including the ones that just took power, to overthrow the regime. This created chaos. 600,000 dead in Syria in a war that has gone on for 14 years. The outcome of this war is what the CIA wanted back in 2011, which is that a jihad group would take power in Syria after being armed by the United States. The reason I want to be clear about this is that we will not have peace in this region until we have public diplomacy that is based on real diplomacy, not on CIA operations. And we will not have peace until Israel stops its militarization of the entire Middle East. Because the Syrian war is just one of 6 wars that Israel has promoted, including in Lebanon, Iraq, Syria, Libya, Somalia, and Sudan. We had the list, actually, from Wesley Clark back in 2001, when he was handed a paper in the Pentagon that the goal was 7 wars in 5 years. The only war that hasn't taken place yet, to Netanyahu's great consternation, is the US war with Iran, which Israel is still trying to instigate to this very day. So the Syrian war is part of a regional tragedy. We have tragedy in Gaza, the West Bank, Lebanon, Syria, Iraq, Sudan, South Sudan, and Libya that I put at the hands of the United States government and its ally Israel, because none of these wars had to happen. These were all wars of choice. They were all wars that came from the idea of regime change operations, that the United States would determine which regimes operate in which countries. We'll never have peace in this region if outside imperial powers like the United States are dictating the terms to this region. The only way to have peace in this region is if this region is determining its own future, not outside powers. And Israel could never do these wars on its own. These are American wars. America provides the financing, it provides the military backup, it provides the naval support, it provides the intelligence operations, it provides the munitions. Israel couldn't fight for 1 day without the United States backing. Israel could not be committing a genocide in Gaza without the United States' full operational complicity. I don't mean political complicity, I mean direct, daily operational complicity. This has to end. This region has been divided for 100 years, first by the British Empire and then by the American Empire. And this is going on until today. We have a genocide going on right next door. Till today, till this morning. People being wantonly killed, brazenly killed, because the United States is providing the means for this.
This has to end. And the funny thing is, ironic and funny thing is, Jeffrey Sachs sat in front of the moderator, Waddah Khamfar. And Waddah Khamfar is one of the biggest Ikhwanjis and the biggest Muslim Brotherhood fanatics in the region, who has been, I believe, the editor-in-chief of Al Jazeera, and he was the spearhead of Al Jazeera's editorial line of dividing Syria into sectarian and ethnic lines, promoting sectarianism, sectarian hatred, rationalizing sectarian hatred, normalizing sectarianism, racism, and also legitimizing Al-Qaeda, legitimizing ISIS in Syria. He played an instrumental role in all this, and now he sits in front of Jeffrey Sachs and like a baby listening now to the teacher, basically like a student listening to the teacher, telling him that without telling him that you were part of the Zionist project and you were part of the CIA project in Syria, right? What does it make? Well, how do you think that Waddah Khamfar would feel sitting in front of Jeffrey Sachs and he's dropping these truth bombs on him? Anyways, I think we also need to mention here the declassified Defense Intelligence Agency report of the United States from 2012. This is the DIA 2012 report, my friends. This intelligence agency, I think, belongs to the Pentagon. And they already, let me screen it to you. I think this is the one, right? Yeah. So this is the document, by the way. If you want, I can also drop this document to you in the chat. They already foresaw in 2012 that this policy of the CIA arming the jihadists in Syria could lead to the establishment of a quote, a Salafist principality in eastern Syria. And this is literally mentioned here. I think, yeah, if the situation unravels, there is the possibility of establishing a declared or undeclared Salafist principality in eastern Syria, in Hasaki and Deir ez-Zor. And this is exactly what the supporting powers to the opposition want in order to isolate the Syrian regime, which is considered the strategic depth of the Shia axis, as they call, including Iraq and Iran. Now, if we go a little bit to the first page of this, by the way, this is the document, just for you to know, so that you notice that this is a genuine document. And this is the first, if we go to the first page and what they're explaining, basically the general situation, they say, internally, events are taking a clear sectarian direction. The Salafist, the Muslim Brotherhood, and Al-Qaeda in Iraq are the major forces driving the insurgency in Syria. The West, Gulf countries, and Turkey support the opposition, which means Al-Qaeda, Muslim Brotherhood, and Salafists, while Russia, China, and Iran support the regime. This is just to your face, right? This is like it's not like I'm bringing any conspiracy. This is from the Defense Intelligence Agency of the United States saying this, right? So I dropped the link of this document also, my friends, in the description below. So they said in 2012 that the policy of Qatar, Saudi Arabia, Turkey, the US, and the rest who supplied all these weapons into the so-called insurgents would lead to the establishment of a Salafist principality in eastern Syria, precisely the entity that would later become ISIS, right? Yet the program of Operation Timber Sycamore continued. Among the beneficiaries, of course, was the faction led by none other than Abu Muhammad al-Jawlani, the former leader of Al-Qaeda in Iraq, who also was the deputy leader of ISIS. And later he branded his organization to Jabhat al-Nusra. And with Gulf state financing and covert Western tolerance, this Al-Qaeda offshoot, which was called Al-Nusra Front, emerged as the most effective fighting force against the Syrian Arab army, right? So sometimes my brain is just fucking with the words. Of course, publicly, Western governments deny direct coordination, but the convergence of interests, in my opinion, was unmistakable, right? Both Israel and the United States wanted the Syrian government weakened and gone. They wanted Iran's corridor to Lebanon severed and Hezbollah isolated. So the proxy war in Syria that was not some spontaneous chaos, as some people think. In my opinion, it was, if we want to put it in structural terms, the realization of the Yinon logic, the Yinon Plan, which was dismantle the state, empower identity militias, sectarian militias, death squads, and create fragmented zones that could never unite again together and cannot coexist together in a unified Syria, right? So this leads us to the disintegration of Syria. I think the Syrian war was literally a textbook example of what scholars call sectarianization, right? The process by which external powers and domestic elites convert political disputes into religious and ethnic and sectarian wars. The social fabric that had held Syria together for decades were Sunnis, Alawites, Christians, Druze, Armenians, and Kurds coexisted under a secular state. This project has been destroyed. This unraveling was not, in my opinion, a natural eruption of age-old hatreds among these communities. It was accelerated by deliberate outside policies that seek to weaken the country's institutions and transform the conflict into a zero-sum civil war. And one of the major players in this has been Qatar and Al Jazeera. Wadda Khamfar, who sits in front of Jeffrey Sachs, he cannot open his mouth and disagree with him. He played an instrumental role in materializing and supporting Israel's strategy in the region. And these people are Muslim brothers, Ikhwanjis. They belong to Qatar. Foreign weapons, money, and media by channels like Al Jazeera and the messaging of Al Jazeera magnified sectarian identities in the region. Militias claimed now that they represent communities rather than a shared nation or an identity. So in doing so, they reproduce the logic outlined by Yinon 40 years earlier. When the central state collapses, local identities, sectarian ethnic identities, become the new organizing principle, right? So the map of Syria was covered with fragments, each a microstate with its own patrons, Kurdish forces in the eastern shore of the Euphrates, Islamic factions, local tribal councils, Druze militias, name it, right? Foreign militaries, all carved out enclaves. So the Syrian Arab army, in my opinion, fought to maintain the integrity of the republic, but it was fighting a hydra whose heads were supplied from abroad. And in my opinion, in many, many cases, they didn't even have heads here because they were brainless people, those who were fighting against the Syrian army. So it looks to me, my friends, in geopolitical terms, that the pattern was eerily familiar here, right? A strong secular state had been dismantled, replaced by fluid zones of control. And this looks like for outside powers, this offers a great strategic flexibility for them. For the people of Syria, of course, this means endless insecurity. But when we compare this reality with the blueprint Yinon sketched, like this, the blueprint Yinon sketched, like a coastal Alawite region, a Sunni-dominated north and probably Damascus, a Druze enclave in the south, the parallels are striking, right? What had been a theoretical model for Israel's long-term security environment looked disturbingly similar to now Syria's wartime fragmentation. So part 5, right? This is 6, actually. So among the actors who rose in this environment is, of course, Abu Muhammad al-Jolani, and he became the emblem of the new order. He is a veteran of Al-Qaeda in Iraq. Jolani founded Jabhat al-Nusra in 2012 and quickly became one of the most powerful insurgent commanders. His group combined hardline ideology with tactical pragmatism, absorbing Western-supplied weapons originally meant for moderate rebels. Over time, Jolani rebranded his faction multiple times, from al-Nusra, then Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, of course, to shed the Al-Qaeda label and court international legitimacy, right? American and regional media outlets, of course, portrayed him less as a terrorist and more as a local strongman who could bring stability to Syria. I think, for me, this transformation illustrated the full cycle of the proxy dynamic. Like extremist networks cultivated during the anti-Assad campaign evolved into quasi-state structures that now administer entire territories in Syria. Remember in Idlib, when Jolani used to occupy only Idlib, he established ministries, courts, police units. Like those are embryonic Sunni mini-state echoing Yinon's theoretical Sunni region in northern Syria, right? So Israel, the US, and Turkey, and also Gulf states each found tactical uses for this new reality. Israeli airstrikes targeted Iranian supply lines while largely avoiding Al-Qaeda positions. Turkey used Idlib as leverage in its dealings with both Moscow and Washington. And the net effect was, of course, the division of Syria. So this is the part that is, I think, we can hear when one overlays the Yinon Plan with today's map of Syria. I think the resemblance is impossible to ignore, right? Yinon envisioned a Middle East of small, self-contained entities bound by ethnic and sectarian logic. The post-2011 war produced precisely that geography, and that is the Kurds in the eastern shore of the Euphrates, the Druze in the south, Sunni militias between Aleppo to Damascus, and the Alawites are waiting for their turn to be saved by some regional or international power and create their autonomy. So each zone functions as a semi-autonomous unit, and together they form a patchwork that guarantees no single actor can reconstitute a unified Syrian state without external consent, whether by design or by opportunism. In this case, I think the result of, when we check the Yinon Plan strategic outlook, we will see that this aligns with the current situation in Syria, and that is a weakened Syria, which ensures Israel's northern front remains fragmented and predictable, right, for them. So I will go to the last part of today's live streaming. Those are my final reflections. I think after the event that many said could never happen, on December 8, 2024, the Syrian capital fell and the Assad government collapsed amid a lightning offensive spearheaded by none other than Abu Muhammad al-Jolani. Western and regional outlets, of course, they were saying that this is an opposition breakthrough from Aleppo down to the M5 corridor, the fall of Homs and Hama, and liberation of Damascus. and Jolani's victory over oppression and Assad's dictatorship and all these things. But since then, a new map has been formed in Syria. Now, Jolani's regime basically exert effective control across a broad swath of northern and central Syria, extending to Damascus, with direct Turkish involvement and Turkish-backed factions in the mix, and Ankara's leverage is visible, right, at every turn. In the east of the Euphrates, US-backed Kurdish forces continue to hold ground and resources. In the south, Daraa and Qunaytira function as de-escalated, demilitarized buffers, and as Sueda, the Druze militias maintain a locally autonomous posture. Meanwhile, on the coast, Alawite communities face the daily precarity of defeat and displacement and slaughtering and kidnapping, looking for any international guarantor, any model of autonomy like that claimed by Kurds and increasingly articulated by Druze leaders in the south. I think in structural terms, it is the sectarianized federation without a signature, right? Zones, patrons, checkpoints, and the permanent negotiation of sovereignty. In my opinion, my friends, if you overlay this reality with, to be honest, with Oded Yinon's 1982 schema, the rhyme is unmistakable. Yinon anticipated that Syria would fracture along sectarian and regional lines: a coastal Alawite redoubt, a Sunni-dominated central belt, a Druze entity in the Horan, and persistent Kurdish autonomy to the northeast. He argued that such a mosaic would guarantee Israel's long-term security because a unified Arab state would never again threaten it. And today's configuration, Jolani's Islamist government extending from Idlib to Aleppo to Hama to Homs and Damascus, Druze control in Sueda, US shielded Kurdish autonomy in the east, demilitarized southern strips, and an Alawite coast under existential pressure tracks the core logic of managed fragmentation. And that is what Yinon Plan wanted to achieve. I've said for years, publicly in Arabic, in English, in all the languages I could, that sectarian violence was not merely the byproduct of war, it was the method by which the map would be redrawn. And I will say it plainly now as my personal conclusion. The massacres that punctuated this long campaign and the recent horrors suffered by Alawite and Druze communities in Syria served a political function, right? They cemented irreversibility, making coexistence feel impossible so that autonomy becomes the only reasonable demand. This is how a geopolitical blueprint crosses the threshold from paper to pavement. When the fear is intimate enough that people beg for their own canton. That is a terrible genius of the Yinon paradigm. It sells safety through separation. So where does that leave Syrians? That's the question, right? That's the real question. I think from a geopolitical lens, Israel now confronts a northern front that is divided, predictable, and externally managed. The United States retains leverage via sanctions, troops, the Euphrates oil. Turkey holds a commanding veto over the northwest and the political fortunes of the new authorities in Damascus. Russia and Iran, who were the pillars of the old order under Assad, have been pushed to the margins or out. Whether that is read as victory or disaster, of course, depends on your moral compass. But in terms of doctrine, the Yinon approach, security through fragmentation, has effectively been operationalized. And yet, many people still refuse to see it. And those people who refuse to see are Syrians with millions. Everything I told you today are public information. You could check it for yourself. I also dropped the sources in the description. And I wanted to make this stream because I saw this conference in Israel. And you know this guy, Eddie Cohen. He's an Israeli, he's a journalist, whatever, expert of Arab affairs. He's from the Jews of Lebanon and now an Israeli. And he organized a conference in Israel for the so-called Syrian minorities.
سويدا نحن في إسرائيل معكم وأنا شخصيا معكم ولازم تصمدوا. وهلا في شتاء وفي خروقات أمنية وبس شغلة واحدة بدي منكم لا تصدقوا لكل خزعبلات تصالح وراية واحدة سورية واحدة. لا ما خلص هذا الجولاني ورقته انحرقت. وانا بحب اهل سويدا وان شاء الله يكون معبر امني معبر مفتوح وان شاء الله تجوا لعنا وان شاء الله تستقبلوني كضيف تعملوا لي قهوه. جاي عبالي اجي على سويدا نروح سوا.
اكيد ان شاء الله. تشرف. الله يسعدك.
Useful idiots, sorry. I think our friend William van Wagenen explained this perfectly. He said there was a big conference gathering Syrian minorities in Israel today. This was yesterday, by the way. The massacres of Alawites in March and massacres against the Druze in July were covertly orchestrated by Israel in partnership with Jolani. The goal was to force Syria's minorities to beg Israel for protection from the Takfiris, including by dividing the country along ethnic and religious lines into federal regions. This was the goal of the US and Israel's covert support for Jolani's Al-Qaeda and other extremist Salafist armed groups, including the FSA, starting in 2011. It was based on the Yinon Plan, which called for the dissolution of all Arab states and replacing them with small ethnic-based cantons under Israeli hegemony. And he posted the Yinon Plan here and also the link to his book, Creative Chaos, which documents the US-Israeli covert support for Al-Qaeda to topple Assad and divide Syria. If you like to purchase this book, guys, I have links in the description below. Those are affiliate links. You don't pay anything extra to them. But if you buy this book, I would get a small commission from Amazon. I just have to see the chat and thank our friend Red Access for becoming a member for 3 months on Syriana Analysis and for moderating the live chat today. He said, who took out Rafiq Hariri and why? That's a very good question. Now, my opinion, who took out Hariri were, this is my conspiracy theory, by the way. This is my conspiracy theory, and I'm saying it's a conspiracy theory. In 2005, they wanted to orchestrate a coup against Assad. This was the same year of what is called, it was an opposition movement started in Damascus, was called Rabia Dimashq, I think, the Spring of Damascus. And after 2003, they wanted, of course, to destabilize Syria and oust Assad, the Americans. I think my conspiracy theory is there were people in the Syrian regime back then, like Abdel Halim Khaddam, who didn't like Assad, Bashar, and who were sidelined from decision-making process. And there were others who were in charge of the Lebanon file from the Syrian regime side. And I think they have cooperated and collaborated with the Americans and the Israelis to assassinate Rafiq al-Hariri, someone from the Syrian regime who doesn't like Bashar, in order to first push the Syrian forces out of Lebanon, which happened right after the assassination of Hariri, and then bring all this political and international pressure on Syria through sanctions, diplomatic pressure, and portray Bashar as the person who planned and executed this plan in order to oust him from power. That's what I think. Now, I might be wrong. Maybe you have a different opinion on that. But what I do after every major political event of this sort is to check who were the benefactors and who gained the most from such an operation. And I think the answer is quite clear in this case, who benefited from the assassination of Rafiq al-Hariri. So, my friends, thank you very much for tuning into today's stream. We will do another stream, of course, tomorrow on Thursday. If you like this stream, please hit the like button, thumbs up before leaving, and subscribe to Syriana Analysis. And if you like to do more and support the independent work I'm doing, you can become a patron. The link is scrolling on the screen, patreon.com/Syriana Analysis, or simply scan the QR code on the screen itself. And if you don't like to use Patreon, there are different other means in the description below. Peace be upon you and upon your families, and see you tomorrow, my friends. Salam.